Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are honored to have Steve Evans for our next Evolution of Sport talk. He is the Senior Vice President of Information Systems of the PGA Tour, and today he's going to speak to the PGA Tour ShotLink system, which includes looking at how the system collects data, how the data is used, and basically what the learnings have been over the last 10 years. And so with that, please join me in welcoming Steve Evans.
Thank you. I always like to start out asking how many people here play golf. All right, that's good. And how many people have been to a PGA Tour tournament? And how many people have volunteered at a PGA Tour tournament? Okay. If you get a chance, volunteer, and as we go through here, I'll explain why. But for those of you that play golf, we'll give you some tips along the way here. So the PGA Tour and our ShotLink system supports 3 tours, the PGA Tour, the Champions Tour, and the Nationwide Tour, which is about 100 golf tournaments a year. So it's a pretty big logistical operation. Today we're going to talk about kind of 4 key areas: how we collect data, how do we use it, what have we learned, and how are we using the analysis today, and then we're going to talk a little bit about a program we call ShotLink Intelligence. So our scoring system has a vision to turn data into information into knowledge, but we didn't want to stop there. We wanted to go further and turn knowledge into entertainment. So over the past 10 years, a big focus has been how do we take this information that we're collecting and translate that for the fan. Oops. So to do that, we have to actually set up a data center and carry our equipment with us every week in the back of a tractor trailer. So on the PGA Tour alone, we have 3 sets of equipment crisscrossing the country, and we bring a limited staff on site to operate it each week. Inside of that tractor trailer, there's a control room in addition to the area that carries just the equipment. And in that control room, there's staff who are monitoring all the data that we're collecting. And there's a fairly sophisticated set of software that's looking at that data for anomalies. And when they get something that doesn't make sense, they have voice communication back out to the people that are collecting the data to get it corrected. Now, one of the unique things about our system is it's completely volunteer-based. It takes about 350 volunteers to score a PGA Tour golf tournament. And half of the job is done by a group of walking scorers who carry a handheld device. And on that handheld device, they're answering questions like where did the player hit the shot from the tee, from the fairway, from the green. They describe the lie. So is it a good lie, a bad lie? Is it uphill? Is it downhill? And most importantly, they timestamp every shot. And the key thing here is it is a real-time system. So from the moment in time they tell us that a player has hit a shot to the time that I can see it in Ponte Vedra, Florida, or the time that my clients get it in Japan is typically 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds. The other job is a laser job. So alongside every fairway and alongside of every green, we operate survey-grade laser equipment. So the volunteers actually shoot every golf ball, and with that we get a coordinate of every ball. Previous to the tournament, we'll have mapped the entire golf course in 3D, so now we can compute exact distances to any target. And because we're collecting data from 2 different sources, we redundantly compute some of the data so we can cross-check it. So an example would be if the walking scorer told us the player hit the shot from the fairway, and the laser operator took a shot on that ball and the computation came back out that it was in the rough, we know we have to reconcile that. Something could be wrong. So maybe we misidentified a player, or maybe something else happened, but we'll get that reconciled very quickly. And our philosophy in the system is that whatever we collect, we immediately distribute. As soon as we do a data correction, we send the data correction back out. So prior to ShotLink, we collected a lot of data, just not at the same level of detail. Currently, our data set dates to 1916. So in the early 90s, we did a fairly large research effort to go get all the history of professional golf and put it into a database. So we have tournament results starting with 1916. In 1983, we actually started our first scoring system. So at that point in time, we started collecting round-by-round information. Between 92 and 2001, we started collecting data at a hole level. In 2001, we introduced the ShotLink system, but it took us about a year and a half to break that in. So the quality of that first 18 months worth of data is iffy sometimes. This was a particularly difficult system to install because it's very difficult to test. It's hard enough to get 350 volunteers to help you run it. It's extremely hard to get another 350 volunteers to help you redundantly test it. So we actually had to break it in live. But since 2003, we have very good quality data. The one point that I would make is we don't run the laser operation on the Nationwide Tour or the Champions Tour. That only runs on the PGA Tour. So to date, we've collected a lot of data. 9,000 tournaments, 28,000 players in our database, 1 million scorecards, 21 million shot level entries. It's very highly structured, easy to analyze, and our accuracy is actually remarkably good. On a greenside shot, we average being plus or minus 2 inches, and on a fairway shot, we average being plus or minus 1 yard. And the reason is we use different quality laser equipment in those two locations. And the way we arrive at these averages is we actually audit the work of our volunteers several times a year with professional surveyors and compare it just to make sure that our quality standards stay high. So ShotLink becomes this engine that consumes data and then packages it and sends it back out. So we enable mobile devices. We enable our website, pgatour.com. We syndicate our own data to roughly 75 different clients. We present information on scoreboards and large format video boards for the fan. And we use it for internal analytics, and we use it for enhancing the telecast and creating stories in the print media. Here's an example of a LED scoreboard. So the same technology you'll see in the major stadiums, we've created a transportable set of the same LED technology and carry it week to week. So we'll put 11 scoreboards up at a PGA Tour event and present data. We've gotten the system down to the point where the walking score actually triggers the content on the scoreboard. So in this case, when Sean O'Hare got over his ball and the volunteer selected his name, that triggered the scoreboard behind him to go into a loop that focused on Sean O'Hare. Actually, one funny point, the volunteers sometimes don't believe that it works that way, so they try to trick us, and they'll press the wrong player's button and take a look. But it works. And so that's actually, from the moment in time they press the button until the time that the loop starts is typically 1 second to 2 seconds, so it's pretty quick and creates a nice fan enhancement. We also drive very large format video walls at some of our more major tournaments. And as I mentioned, we enable mobile devices. So in our sport, we've actually been anti-mobile device until a year ago. You were not allowed to bring your smartphone or cell phone to a golf tournament. Depending on the event, you could get various levels of security kind of checking for it. But a year ago, we changed our policy and moved to an area where we did a lot of education on how to deal with your mobile device properly at a golf tournament. And that's received a lot of positive feedback, but it also gives us an opportunity to really enhance the fan experience on site. Our primary concerns were obviously the noise that would be created from a cell phone ringing or from a fan talking on the phone. As it turned out, the bigger concern ended up being actually to do with photography. And so we don't allow photography during the official competition, and so we've had to manage a problem we didn't expect, but nonetheless, we've got a really good fan experience, and today we have an application that works well on site, and in a couple of months we'll have one that's even more targeted for the on-site fan, driven by the ShotLink system. So what have we learned? We'll talk a little bit about what we've done with our broadcast, what we've learned from amateurs, and how to compare amateur play to professionals. And we'll talk a little bit about a new putting statistic that we introduced just short of a year ago. So in the telecast, I mentioned that we map in 3D the entire golf course. So here's an example of an execution that hit the air a couple of weeks ago on CBS. Phil Mickelson was actually, over the past, I think it was like 10 events, was actually had more birdies on this particular hole than any other score, and we were able to visually depict that. We probably put in several thousand new or incremental graphic instances or statistical mentions in our telecast since we introduced this system. And our sport is a sport where it's really hard to explain why a player is doing well, so stats help us quite a bit. A good example would be probably 4 or 5 weeks ago when Tiger Woods and Phil Mickelson were playing at Pebble Beach. We were able to determine that Mickelson putted 5 shots better than the field. Tiger putted 5 shots worse than the field. So there was a 10-shot difference between the two of those players just in one round. Okay, here's the part where I hope I can teach you something. We worked with Dave Pelz, and we use the same ShotLink system to collect data every year at the World Amateur Handicap Tournament in Myrtle Beach, which hosts about 2,000 to 3,000 golfers over the course of a week. And on the putting green, we learned that regardless of what your handicap was, that a 20 handicapper and a 30 handicapper would leave their putts short somewhere between 44 and 55% of the time. The problem is if you leave the putt short, it has no chance to go in the hole. The interesting thing is as we step down in handicap range, we can go all the way down to a scratch golfer, still leaves the putt short 44% of the time. The difference is the pro player leaves the putt short 15% of the time. So for those of you that raise your hand and play golf, you can improve your game solely by moving to the professional level. Get the putt to the hole. At least you have a chance. Because most of you and most of the amateurs out there don't. So a year ago, we got some, well actually 5 years ago, we opened up our data set to the academic community and asked them to perform any type of analytic they'd like to against this data set. And we've called the program ShotLink Intelligence. That bore or created a new statistic last year called strokes gained putting. It was based on research from Columbia and here at MIT. It's the first putting stat that actually valued distance. So in the past, our putting leaders were typically an average of how many putts they took in total or the average number of putts they took when they hit the green in regulation. Since we're including distance now, there's a difference between a 2-putt from 8 feet or a 2-putt from 33 feet. The difference is at 7 feet 8 inches, a 2-putt loses half a shot to the tour average. And a 33-foot putt doesn't gain or lose. That's the average. An average 2-putt on the PGA Tour is from 33 feet. So if you miss 2 8-foot putts, you lose 1 stroke, which means you have to make 2 other 8-foot putts. Or you've got to make a 14-foot putt and a 5-foot putt. Or you have to make a 100-foot putt. And that just gets you back to even. 70% of the tour winners finish the event ranking in the top 15 in this category. And they average 1 1/4 strokes per round better than the field in those victories. So they average 5 shots better than the field over the course of a tournament just on the putting surface. Yesterday, CDW, our technology partner, announced a prize based around the ShotLink Intelligence program. So, as I said, we've been offering the data to the academic community for the past 5 years. Now what we're going to do is offer a prize for the best work best paper that gets published using this data. It's available to all participants, so anybody in the academic community can participate. If you go to our website at pgatour.com/ShotLink Intelligence, there's information on how to request access to the information. Papers will be due in November. The best paper is going to receive a $25,000 technology gift from CDW for their university. We'll announce the winners no later than March of next year. And we're actively working with the Journal of Quantitative Analysis in Sports regarding a special golf issue that would come out of papers. The papers would have to go through peer review before being published, but we're working with them to create a special golf publication. That's what I have. I'm happy to take any questions and I'll do the best to answer them.
Could you say why the data is available only to the academic community and
Yeah.
not generally available?
Well, the stipulation we have with our data is that it be used for publishing academic papers. And the reason is that the data that we collect and the method with which we collect it is a proprietary solution that we just don't make the data available publicly for a number of reasons, which I really probably can't go into. But we're happy to make it available to the academic community for the purpose of publishing papers.
I was just wondering, we talked about the reception on the fan angle. I was wondering how much players have expressed interest in getting the data, or coaches, that type of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Players and coaches have had varying degrees of reaction. When we first introduced ShotLink, I remember we've got a nice 3-page profile for each player, and we went around into one of the locker rooms and we're putting each player's profile in his locker. And one of the players came up and said, "You're not going to put that in my locker, are you?" And we said, "Well, yeah, we are." "Why is that?" And he said, "Well, it says I'm ranked last on tour from putting from 12 to 15 feet. And I don't want to think about that." But most players actually use the data to evaluate where they are year over year and work with their coaches to create training plans to improve in certain areas. So Hunter Mahan would be a good example. 2 years ago, he hit a really bad chip shot, kind of under pressure at the Ryder Cup. He struggled with his short game. Even last year, probably had a very good chance to win the Tour Championship and the FedEx Cup Trophy, but again, struggled with his short game. Worked really hard in the offseason, came back and won our match play event last week, exhibiting a really good short game. So there's an example of where somebody really took a look at the data and made a conscious effort to improve. But then there are other players who really don't spend a lot of time with the data. So we haven't really probably reached our full potential with their instructors and with our players yet.
Okay, 2 questions. One, do you include with the data the ambient conditions like the wind, temperature, altitude, that sort of thing?
We don't collect altitude, but it wouldn't be hard to get that. But the other conditions, we do wind speed and wind direction, and I think we do temperature. I don't remember if we do temperature or not. But we do weather readings twice a day, and then we correlate it to each hole, so we can give you the direction the wind's blowing in comparison to each hole.
Okay. The other question was, I read a paper some time ago. They talked about the difference between putts for par and putts for birdie.
Mm-hmm.
They had, in that paper, they had the location on the green as well as the slope, so they can match up putts by not only distance but by location, slope, the grain, what have you. Is that data from you? So in other words, do you have more granular data for the putting?
Mm-hmm. We do.
Getting back to the players who use the data, do they only have access to their own statistics, or do they have access to versus the field, or do they have like all the data? With
one exception, they have access to all the data. I didn't mention it, but on one hole each week, we do set up a radar system, and we track clubhead speed, ball speed, spin rate, and the entire flight of the ball off the tee. For that set of data, at this point in time, we will only let a player see his data. But for all the rest of the data, they have access to all of it. Mm-hmm. They do.
Hi, excuse me. What is the PGA Tour's take in terms of a regulatory environment of players wearing sensors for real-time monitoring, I guess, in-game? I mean, obviously the ShotLink it's human operated, so it's people in the field and volunteers, as you mentioned. But in terms of a real-time player analysis system that you would see in other sports, what's the regulatory environment towards something like that?
So anything that you would do to the equipment, we can't touch the equipment. So we can't censor the ball, we can't censor the club. But we technically could censor the players themselves. The issues that the area that we've really focused on doing that has typically been microphoning the players and not really doing data collection. But most microphone solutions today require a wire and some sort of power supply that you would typically put on your belt, and that's just not going to work in our sport. So if we can censor players without them knowing it, so if we can put it on their hat or we can do something that's unobtrusive, we're open to that. But if it takes more than that, our players are not willing to do it.
Okay, I was thinking about something along the lines of heart rate monitoring or vital sign monitoring of I guess a player in real time, so you can see a player's actual heartbeat over a tough putt. I mean, I guess streaming that into the web has serious sort of interest from a fan's point of view. I guess.
We've had some talks on it. There's some technologies we looked at that would allow us to do that without actually putting sensors on the players. We opted not to do that about 10 years ago. But we're always open to ideas.
Thanks.
The USGA and RNA have said they're going to take a harder look at ruling on belly putters going forward. Have they asked for any data from you all, and if they have, do you plan on sharing it with them?
Yeah, we openly share our data with the USGA and the Royal and Ancient, who are both the two rules bodies in the game. And we collaborate openly with them. But as it relates to using the data to create rules, we leave it to them.
Have you all done any independent testing on your own to see if there's any substantial difference in success or failure with short putters versus putters?
We've done some anecdotal work with it. I would say that the reason the whole belly putter concept is such a big topic today is because Keegan Bradley won a major last year using a belly putter. So the first time somebody used a non-traditional putter. I would tell you that in an unscientific way, the belly putter typically takes players who have some sort of flaw or problem with their putting and helps solve some sort of problem. We haven't seen where it takes a player and turns them into a top 10 or top 20 player. But the USGA is looking at that from a much different angle, and they look at it across the spectrum of professionals and amateurs, so I can't comment on where they stand on that.
Steve, thank you for sharing with us. What do you have in mind specifically in terms of compared to, say, fan entertainment, education of people and golfers in terms of how good these players really are?
Yeah, that's one of the really big challenges we have, and that's why we've started working with Dave Pells to collect the amateur data and begin to start telling some of those stories. The amateur data we have is probably about 5 years worth of data collection. We collect data on one course for about 150 players a day for 4 days. So we've got a fairly small amateur data set. So we've begun to be able to learn that, but we haven't really gotten enough data to where we feel confident telling a lot of stories. So I shared the putting story. We have similar stories with distance control. So a scratch golfer's distance control on a par 3 is significantly different than that of a tour professional. And so you'll see us over the next several years start to spend more time trying to talk about the differences between amateur players and professionals in our broadcast.
Thanks for that, Steve. Then lastly from my side, I just want to find out, we did some work last year on the British Open and then at the Ladies British Open as well on the tee. And it was remarkable to see, with all respect to the ladies, the men in terms of their knowledge at the moment about their distance control, knowing their distances. That was phenomenal to see what they can really do. At the Ladies Women's Open, most of the people, or most of the ladies that didn't make the cut, actually, their problem was that they didn't know their distances at Carnoustie under the conditions, and that was something that I think when you pull this down to amateur players, people just don't know their distances per club, especially men. They always think they hit much further than they do. But going into the detail of the skill, I'm, as a golfer and as a technologist, I'm really keen to see that people understand, what, as you said, the skill level of players. If you throw targets at them and say, shoot 50 yards or 30 yards or 150 or whatever, the ability of those players to do that and consistently do that is impeccable. And I think normal golfers, even if they shoot a low score now and then, they just don't know how good these guys are.
No, it's fair. On a like 180-yard par 3, a pro's distance control will probably be, he'll have a fairly wide dispersion left to right, but his distance control is probably going to be 3 to 4 yards, where if you get to a scratch golfer, you're up into the 15-yard range.
How are you looking to expand the data you're collecting, if at all? Are you trying to get into looking at launch conditions or any other data around the course? Or is it kind of what now do you do with the data you have?
Yeah, I think from gathering more data, we could gather more data in launch conditions if we put more radar on the course. Frankly, the data set we have is pretty good, and if you try to put radar on more holes on the course, what you get into is a bigger variety of clubs that are being used. And so our interest right now is primarily with drivers, so we feel like we have that covered. The thing that we would like to do, and we're taking a look at today, is we'd like to actually start to study the ball as it comes into the green. And so understanding spin as it hits the green and what happens to the ball from the point where it hits to the point that it comes to rest. And so that's something that we're actively taking a look at.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to cut you off. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you.